This talk, if we were going by the schedule, would probably be a question and answer, but it's not going to be a question and answer tonight because weird stuff happened lately and I want to talk about it. I had an experience myself over the last few days, and then one of our old students had an experience that's tangentially related, and I want to talk about that and kind of like one of the lessons that I gleaned from it. But I was walking through downtown Los Angeles, which I fully believe is turning into a totally fine place to spend time and not super dangerous. But this was midnight on Tuesday, and I was with some friends, and we were leaving and walking to my car, and we were walking past. There was only one other person on the street, and he was carrying a wrench in his hand, and he looked like he was not, necessarily trying to start any trouble, but he also did not necessarily look like he was not trying to start any trouble. So he was just kind of there, a little bit weird, and I saw the wrench and I thought, what kind of work is this guy doing at midnight on a Tuesday? This is a little bit strange. And so the way that I handled this situation as a self-defense teacher and somebody who thinks about it and talks about it all the time is to look at that person and make sure that I can see them all the time and not start anything else. And I've been in multiple situations in my life where I thought, this is somebody who might try to start some trouble. I'm just literally going to look at them. So if they do, I know what's going on. I can see it ahead of time and be able to deal with it. So I kind of kept myself between my friends and this person as we were walking down the street and looked back and made sure that he wasn't going to turn around and try to hit somebody in the head with a wrench. But we kept walking, and this was like on the block that my car was on, and we got to my car, and I noticed that all the stuff in my car was on the street. And they had taken my jiu-jitsu gi with my belt and thrown it out the window when it was on the ground. And that was the most valuable thing in my car by far. So as soon as I saw that, I thought, who's the a-hole who did this? But also, thank God it's still here. They didn't take it. Because I've had students in the past, and I've known people who've had their martial arts equipment, including their sash or their belt, stolen out of their car, and that sucks because then you have to come back to Sifu and say, my car got broken into and somebody stole my sash, and it's really embarrassing. But that didn't happen to me, so I don't have to go to Hadra Machado and tell them that. But they destroyed everything in my car. They smashed the window on the passenger side. They took all the stuff from the glove box and threw it all over the place. So the passenger seat is covered in a sea of broken glass and all the junk that I have not looked at in about 4 years in my glove compartment. And so, and I looked and checked everything else, and they took all the stuff out of the little center console, including the $3 worth of quarters that I had in there. And they took the quarters and they threw everything else onto the street, my gum and all of it. And my first thought was, oh, that was probably the guy who did it, and I should call the police. My first thought was not, that's the guy who did it, I'm going to go stop him or I'm going to go pound him. And that is the first thought that many people in that situation have, including and maybe even especially people who practice martial arts. Because if you're practicing in a certain kind of environment, you kind of start to get into this mindset of, oh, the way to solve problems is to punch and kick people. That's not the mindset that we practice with here. We understand that the way to solve problems is sometimes to move, sometimes to clinch or throw or grapple, or sometimes to run away, or sometimes to just talk to the person, as we do with our partners in class. Somebody's really kind of being a jerk in class, you say, can you please be less of a jerk? And then that's it. So my first thought was, I'm going to call the police, but this guy was already walking away, so I started to follow him. And I didn't want to get too close because I've seen plenty of spy movies. I kind of stayed like around the corner and I was looking at him, and I'm on the police on the call, and I'm like, hey, somebody broke into my car. And I'm pretty sure I see the guy. And they're like, can you speak up? And I'm like, no, I can't. And they say, did you actually see him break your window? And I said, no, I did not. They put me on hold. They're like, let me get you on the line with somebody else. The next person comes on. They ask me the same question. I say, no, I didn't see him, but I'm sure that it's the guy because it's the only person around here, and he's got a wrench in his hand. And who's got a wrench in his hand at midnight on a Tuesday night in downtown Los Angeles? And they said, we cannot send anybody out there if you didn't actually see them break into your car. Which is understandable because this is Los Angeles, and I'm sure there are plenty of more terrible things happening to people. But I am positive that if they had shown up and stopped that guy, they would have found $3 worth of quarters in his pocket and nothing else worth anything. And so they asked me, do you want to stay on the line and make the report? And I said, no, it's going to be totally pointless. He's not even going to be here by the time I finish the report. And then what? You're going to come look for him 2 days later? So I get it. And it was frustrating because that guy, who knows what he went and did after that? Maybe he went and smashed a few other windows because he obviously did not get enough money to pay for whatever he was trying to pay for in my car. I doubt that $3 was going to do it. And this is obviously a desperate person. And this is part of what kind of feeds into my decision making of not trying to confront this person. Is because when somebody is committing a crime like that, they are probably not in the right mind. They are at least desperate. And they're thinking, like, I don't want to go down for this. If it comes down to this person stopping me and calling the police, or me just cracking them in the head with this wrench, I might do that. You also don't know if this person has a knife or a gun. It's less likely, but still possible. And even that wrench is very dangerous. It's more dangerous than a stick. I feel fairly confident in my ability to defend myself against somebody, even if they have a wrench. And I should feel more confident than you guys and most people who practice martial arts because they probably have practiced less, or for sure less time practicing against weapons. But my decision is something that I have made a long time ago. This is something that I decided when I was practicing with Sifu Brown, and is based on his advice of don't start fights. If this is something that you can avoid it. And I was even on the edge of what was safe and appropriate by even following him, staying a block away and ducking behind corners and stuff, because even that, he looked back and saw me a couple of times on the phone and maybe even assumed that I was calling the police. And he could have run after me, and in that situation I would have had to do something. But this is an example of one of many times where I have been in a situation that could have easily turned into a fight, and it didn't, not because of the other person, but because of me. And I decided I'm not interested in fighting. Even if I'm pretty positive that I could take this person, it's not worth it. It's not worth the risk to me. And I don't even want to beat somebody else up. And would it be nice to have somebody else pay the $300 to fix my window? Yes. And still not worth the chance of traumatic brain injury and whatever else. So he left, and that was the end of it. It reminded me of another story that one of our old students told me. This happened about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. But she was asleep in her apartment with her roommates in the other room, and she was awoken rudely in the middle of the night by the sound of somebody storming into the apartment, walking into the bathroom, and slamming the door. And she woke up and went, is this happening? It was very late, and she was, sleepy and groggy, but she was sure what she heard, and she thought, nobody's supposed to be walking into the apartment right now. So she went over the door and knocked on the door, and she's like, hey, who is that? And she hears a loud voice, a male voice from inside the bathroom, give me a minute. And she realizes right away, this is not somebody who's supposed to be in my bathroom right now. So she bangs on the door, hey, get the hell out of my apartment. You're not supposed to be in here. And he opens the door, and he's got his pants down around his ankles, but still wearing underwear. And he opens it a crack, and he says, I said, give me a minute. And he shuts the door again in her face and proceeds to use the bathroom. And she's getting kind of kind of riled up at this point, like, this guy, I'm going to get him out of my apartment and do whatever it takes to make this happen. And so she's waiting out there, and one of her other roommates comes out and is kind of standing behind her, and the guy finally finishes in the bathroom, and he opens the door, and she starts yelling at him, you got to get out of here, you got to leave. And he goes over and just sits on the couch and is like going to just hang out there, maybe spend the night. And she's really yelling, you got to go. And there's a little bit of a back and forth, but he ends up getting between her and the door, and he grabs a pan, a frying pan or some pan from the kitchen, and she is still kind of in his face yelling at him to go, and he bonks her on the head with the pan. And she goes down, ah! And she is okay, but she's got a big bump on her head. And the guy proceeded to sit back down and just hang out there. And her roommate and another roommate who was hiding in the other room had both called the police. And the police showed up 10 minutes after they called, which I don't know about police response times, but that seems kind of terrible. And also, in that time, he easily hit one person on the head with a pan and could have kept going, could have kept beating her up, could have had a knife, could have grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started to, attack other people. And I think there were 3 other women in the apartment, none of whom had practiced martial arts, I believe. And this is a scary situation, even though this guy did not have any intention to hurt anybody. And this was part of what this other student was reasoning with, like, why she was confronting him and telling him to leave, was she said she could tell that he wasn't trying to hurt anybody. He was just there, like, trying to use the bathroom and take a nap. But you still see what happens when that confrontation, when you're really getting somebody's face. And so she ended up going to the ER, and she had a bump on her head, but no serious anything. But that was scary. Now, the first part of that I didn't tell was her apartment's security door at the front of the complex had not been working, and it had been unlocked permanently for months at that point. And then they had also left their door unlocked by mistake. If either one of these doors had been locked, this guy would have gone somewhere else. But they weren't. And you guys have heard me say this as a huge important point in our self-defense seminar that I teach, the ABCs of self-defense. Almost half, it's like 40% of home invasions happen through unlocked doors and windows. And if you just lock your doors and windows, then that's 40% less of the likelihood of home invasion happening. So this situation could have been avoided in many ways. And I get that when you're woken up in the middle of the night, that you don't have your wits about you. And when I was talking about this with her, she said, like, we always think of self-defense like, I'm going to be ready, I'm going to be awake, I'm going to be able to make the right decision, but it doesn't always happen that way. And in fact, I would suggest, as I have in many classes in the past, that when it happens, you are not going to be in your right state of mind because it's going to surprise you. It's probably going to scare the hell out of you. You might freeze up. You might freak out. And in those situations, something bad can happen. I'm not even going to say that what she did is 100% wrong, because there are some situations where a firm word, telling somebody to get out of there, to leave you alone, can work. I will say what I told her, which is there are other things that are more likely to work, which is just lock yourself in your room and call the police. And yell to all your roommates, there's a guy in here, stay in your room, lock the door, I'm calling the police. Or you get out of there. You just run right out the front door and call the police from there. It's dangerous to be in a enclosed space with somebody who's trying to attack you. This is a similar situation to what I've described in the past, where it's like you might need to actually take somebody down and keep them there so that you can protect the other people in there. It's not a good situation to be in. It's bad. But this goes back to speaking towards this idea of I've made the decision ahead of time what I'm going to do in this situation. And I've said, if you can run, you should run, absolutely. I don't like the idea of barricading yourself in your room as much because there's always the chance that they'll break that door down and come after you, but it's still better than being out there in the open with this person. But if you're stuck and you cannot get out of that situation, one of the interesting things that you can do to really throw the attacker off is to take something really solid like a piece of rock. What do you have that's solid in your apartment? An ashtray is what we use. Nobody has ashtrays anymore. Well, I guess now weed is legal. So an ashtray or something else solid. You got a paperweight or whatever. The pan, I guess, that the guy grabbed. And you chuck it through the window and it makes a loud noise and you start yelling like crazy. And that startles the other person, and that might give you the chance that you need to run out the door. Or if they're in between you, that gets them to think, I better get out of here because I don't want to get caught. But the interesting thing is, in this specific situation, this guy obviously was not thinking straight because he hit somebody in the head and then sat there and waited for the police to show up. Unless maybe he was trying to get arrested so that he could spend the night in jail and get a free meal. But there's no guarantee that anything is going to have the intended outcome. But the chances are likely that something beneficial will happen to you, aside from your broken window. But they're probably going to leave, or they'll give you a second to get out of there. But this is all about, did I make the decision ahead of time how I'm going to handle this decision, or how am I going to handle this situation? And also, do I have the ability in that moment to think straight enough to remember the decision that I made? And there's a little bit of wiggle room there. If you have really thought about this and put it somewhere in the world, you've taken notes about it, or you've told people about it, like I have many, many times, it's more likely to be present for you. Like the first thing that comes to mind is, I got to get out of here. The first thing that comes to mind is, I got to call the police. But if you have never thought about it, whether you're in the right mindset or not, you might make a dumb decision. If you have decided ahead of time what you're going to do, but you are still completely out of sorts, you've allowed yourself to freak out or freeze up, or you're like literally not awake enough to recognize what the situation is, if you cannot assess the situation properly, then the decision that you made in the past is still kind of useless. So we're talking about two main things. While you are in the right state of mind, while you are, thinking about this from a logical point of view, you make the decision. If I find myself in this situation, this is what I'm going to do. And then in the moment, we have to be able to get ourselves to be as calm and logical, but also to be able to be decisive as possible. So that comes back to kind of like what I was talking about last week. We go back to the breath, and we are training ourselves. When you meditate, you're training your mind to go back to the breath. When we practice in class, trying to, we find ourselves sparring and we find ourselves getting tense and rigid, or we're grappling and the same thing happens. We go back to the breath. And it's precisely this recognition of tension, this recognition of I'm starting to freak out, and then pairing that with I've got to get myself relaxed and calm. I've got to go back to the breath. When we practice doing that in connection, in class, then it's more likely to happen outside of the dojo. And most of you guys have heard me say this in the past. We have never had somebody actually, until this instance, get attacked who is a student. Now, I can't say this because maybe students who've been gone for years and years, but we've never had a current student get attacked by somebody and get seriously injured because they've always been able to defend themselves either by getting away or by being able to strike or throw or whatever else. So we've had people get attacked by people with weapons, never a frying pan, that's a new one, but somebody with a knife. We've had people get attacked by multiple attackers. But this is the first time that I've heard of somebody who I know personally got attacked like in the middle of the night and woke up from it. So that's scary, and that makes it more difficult for sure. But you can still imagine a situation where maybe you are not asleep, but you're getting attacked, and even though you are fully awake, you start to get adrenalized. You start to think, oh my God, is this it? Am I about to die? Somebody's pointing a gun at you. Somebody's holding a knife in front of your face, and you're getting hypnotized by it, and your life is flashing before your eyes. You're thinking about all the things that you wish that you had done and all of the regrets in life. And all of that stuff means it's very hard, it's very difficult to respond the way that you want to in this situation. So this is like the idea of planning for a fire when your house is burning down. You can't go, oh, something really bad is happening. What am I supposed to do now? Oh yeah, breathe. You're not probably going to even remember to breathe in that moment unless you've done it so many times that it becomes second nature. It just becomes the thing that you do because you don't know how to do anything else other than I'm stressed, I breathe. Something freaky is happening, I feel my body start to tense up, I breathe, I relax. So this is something that clearly is super important in a self-defense situation. But as I've said many times in the past, this is not that likely to happen to you. There's like a 1 in 6 chance that you'll get violently attacked at some point in your life, but that's I believe a statistic that's like countrywide. And right here in like Brentwood, Santa Monica, your chances are, I believe, quite a bit lower than that. If you are in downtown or you're somewhere else in the country that's more dangerous, or of course somewhere else in the world, or you're in the military or a police officer or something, your odds go way up. But even so, you will find many more situations in life that are not actually life or death for you to practice this and get a ton of use out of it. If you're thinking to yourself right now, I got to practice getting myself to be calm, and I got to think about the way I'm going to handle this situation ahead of time so that it can save my life someday, you're right, you should. And if it never happens, don't let it go to waste. You've got lots of other situations that you might find yourself in that you could get, still very stressed and still freaking out and still saying things that you will later wish that you had not said, doing things, and as they say, writing checks that your mouth that your butt can't cash. Is that how it goes? Something like that. You don't want, that's not how it goes. Catherine's like, that's certainly not it. They don't have that saying in New Zealand. You don't know what I'm talking about. You don't want to, make these split-second decisions from a place of freaking out, even if it's not physically dangerous, because these things are going to come back to haunt you later on. And if there's one thing that I know that human beings love to do, it's make rash decisions when you are super emotional. It's the worst thing that you can do is make decisions when you're super emotional and not logical. And it's like, yet it's really interesting because this is kind of what our emotions are there for, is to spur us on into action. You don't want to ignore the thing that's happening to you. You still want to take action. You still want to recognize that whatever's causing you this really negative emotional response, there's something to be dealt with here. But if you just do the first thing that pops into your head, it might be to start a fight with somebody. It might be to say something that you later wish that you hadn't said. And so you want to be able to take that breath. And this is, really at the core of our practice, whether it's meditation or Tai Chi or even Kung Fu and martial arts, as you're rolling with your partner in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We are always looking at how can we reprogram our response so that it is something that's useful. It's something that serves us. Our emotions are meant to be tools our adrenal, or a response to get adrenalized, the adrenal response, that kind of fight or flight, is meant to be a tool that helps us. But most often, I would say, it's something that takes over and it starts to be in control of us. And this is not a good place to be. So we get the emotion and we recognize this is an emotion, and I try to recognize what it's in response to, and I try to recognize what it's trying to get me to do right now, what that gut response is. But then I recognize that really what I want to do here is breathe and relax and get myself into as calm of a state as possible. And you might not have time to completely calm down. You might not have time to go sit down and meditate. But you've got time to take one breath. Even in a self-defense situation, you might not have a whole breath, but you've got enough to take part of a breath. Or at least think about, I'm going to connect my mind to this part of the breath. And when that happens, you are connecting to this moment. Your breath is the connection to now. And now is actually a pretty okay place. Because when we're freaking out, that's happening because my mind's going to crazy places of what's about to happen to me, or what just happened to me, and how dare they, I can't believe they had the nerve to break my window. I'm going to go tell that guy what's what. Now is just now. You can deal with it. We're not attached to what has happened or what we think is going to happen. We are just here, being. And you might only get this moment before somebody is trying to actually attack you. You might only get this moment before somebody is saying something really annoying or painful to you. But that moment, even if that's all that you get, is enough to make some kind of a difference. And when we practice that in class and outside of the dojo, we're rewiring our brain, and we're getting to the place where this is something that we do consistently. And then, even if it doesn't go perfectly now, we've still kind of created that habit so that it might happen again in the future, and you might get the perfect, or you're responding well. That's what Sifu Brown always says, is martial arts is not about making the perfect decision, because oftentimes there is no perfect decision. There are a lot of terrible things that you can do right now, and at least a couple of good things that you can do. But responding well is from a place of calm centeredness, as much as I can get. Then I choose. I don't let this thing happen as a reaction, as a response. I do want to respond. I don't want it to be this kind of gut reaction. The other thing that he would say all the time is we're learning to be masters of our actions rather than prisoners of our reactions. Our reactions, that's like something happens and we just react immediately. You are essentially a slave to your emotion, to your reaction, to whatever it is, rather than, as he used to say all the time, and I love this idea, you put a pause in there. In that pause is where we get to choose. That is where we choose, rather than letting the decision choose for us what happens, or the situation choose for us what happens. So, as you sit tonight, don't be in your head all like, oh my God, what would I do if somebody broke into my apartment tonight? What would I do if I saw somebody break into my car? Don't sit there and do that, because all of that you're going to find is just like, you're starting to freak yourself out. We want the flip of that. You want to practice getting yourself calm. And I'll admit this, every once in a while when I meditate, I do actually get into a train of thought like that, where I'm, maybe replaying the events of the day, something that really pissed me off, or I'm thinking, oh my God, what would I do if I found myself in that situation? And I recognize that as soon as I can, and I say, this is a great opportunity for me to practice. I can feel myself getting tense, and then I go back to the breath. You don't need to put yourself in that situation on purpose in meditation, because it's probably going to happen for you without you even trying to. But try to just get yourself to go back to the breath and spend as much time reconnecting to that moment as possible. Sit comfortably.